Today we've got action, babes, and Jason Statham. Finally, a good movie. We start off with a huge ship on an expansive body of water. We see two guys are trying to steal some booze. These guys are really risking their lives for a little juice. We all know someone like that. Anyway, as it turns out, it's not booze in there. It's some toxic gas. So once they open it, they get fried. The captain and some other guys rush down there, find their bodies and take them home for a befitting burial. You thought they just threw the bodies into the ocean. Next, we follow an Audi out of their ship and through a police checkpoint. Then we see two guys fishing in a little boat. Well, more like one man fishing and one dozing off. The guy in the Audi stopped for yet another security check, but this time he's asked to step out of the car and into the office. He acts as if he's ready to comply, but he speeds off. And just 5 minutes in, we have our first car chase. And that's what I'm talking about. The race and the fishing are somehow linked, though. The directions for the fishing apply to the driving, that type of stuff. Soon, the link is revealed. One of the fishermen, Inspector Tarconi, gets a call about the guy in the Audi, and he looks at his fishing partner, Frank, like he was suspicious of him, but he has the perfect alibi. Anyway, fishing had to be abandoned and the two men left. Then we see a man in a three-piece suit coming down from a jet. He's accompanied by some men through immigration. He says he's here for environmental business. And just after that, a minister is being interviewed by journalists about environmental business too. Apparently, this minister likes to piss off a lot of people. He's just like me trolling on Twitter. Anyway, he gets a confidential package and a phone inside it starts ringing. He picks it up and it's our guy from the jet talking and also watching him through a pair of binoculars. The guy from the jet says his name is not important and he basically tells Mr. Minister to get back into negotiations with EcoCorp for insurance of a license to do business in Ukraine. If not, it's his daughter's head. The guy has the minister's daughter and he put her picture in that envelope as proof. He opens it and he's scared. Now we see Frank relaxing in front of the TV even though his face doesn't look so relaxed. He gets up to pick up the TV remote and a few seconds later, that Audi from earlier rams into his sitting room. My man could have really died had he not stood up. Anyway, he calls the ambulance for the guy driving, checks his pulse, and then his passport. He sees his name is Malcolm and starts calling out to him to try and wake him up. As Frank is calling out his name, it takes him back to a time when he referred this same guy for a job he did not want to take. His refusal to take the job led to a huge fight. Well, not really a fight, just Frank whipping 4 grown men's asses gentleman style. No stain on his white shirt, cufflinks still on, tie still fastly knotted, and his jacket didn't even touch the floor once. Those men should be ashamed of themselves. After he's done with the men, we're back to present day and Malcolm finally wakes up and yeah, they both know each other. Malcolm doesn't want to go in the ambulance. He just keeps saying something about the car, but Frank insists and he's taken away. After he's taken, Malcolm finds a woman in the car who says, "Don't leave the car." Frank asks, "What's special about the car?" And she says, "Not the car," and shows him something she was wearing on her wrist. That thing is the same thing Malcolm had on his wrist, and when he figured it all out, it was too late. He ran after the ambulance to try and stop them from taking Malcolm, but the vehicle blew up. He goes back to the car to meet the lady, who tells him, "I told you." But before he could even react, he was knocked down with a punch to the face. Today's video is brought to you by Bespoke Post. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club delivering awesome boxes of top shelf goods from under the radar brands. It's free to join and you can skip a month or cancel anytime. There's new stuff every month: outdoor gear, barware, home and kitchen goods, clothing, and more. We're talking about $70 worth of goods inside these boxes that only cost you a fraction of the value. All you gotta do is take a little quiz to make your preferences known and you're good to go. Plus, you can preview your box before it's shipped. You can keep it, swap it, or skip it. You only pay for what you want. So Bespoke Post was kind enough to send me some things. Now, first of all, we've got some very cozy, comfy slippers, which will be very needed for winter. This is part of the Hibernate box, which also came with a room spray that has eucalyptus and just overall smells really good. Then, perhaps not so fitting for winter, is this portable cooler. Lots of space inside. Inside of it, it also has a handy dandy little bottle opener. Thanks again to Bespoke Post, and to get 20% off your first box, click the link in the description and enter MinuteMovies20 at checkout. Or go to bespokepost.com/minutemovies20. He wakes up in some sort of strange room, and he notices that he has that same metal thing around his wrist. Some straight up metal abs on his body too. But nothing seems strange to this guy for some reason. He just stood up and went to dress up like it was a normal day. Sir, this is not a normal day at all. Anyway, while he's dressing up, the man from the jet comes in with those guys whose asses Frank beat the other time. Apparently, they took his recommendation and hired Malcolm, but he didn't finish the job. Now they want Frank himself, but he says he's unavailable. The leader of the pack tries to interject and gets shot for his troubles, but he asked for permission, boss. That was a little harsh, don't you think? Anyway, he's now pointing that same revolver at Frank and telling him he has 3 seconds to change his mind, so Frank says he'll work with him on the condition that he gets to drive his own car. Not a problem for this guy. They had already even got an Audi ready for him beforehand. Product placement moment. Then he's telling Frank to think of this as a mission and not just another job, but there's a lot of touching going on here and it's making me a little uncomfortable, I can't lie. Anyway, Frank finds out that the lady from the other Audi is in this new Audi and he wants her gone, but he changes changes his mind when he finds out this guy's interpretation of God is gone forever. Before Frank drives off, the man explains how the bracelet thing works. If he gets 75 feet away from the car, he blows up. That's why Malcolm and the lady kept saying, the car. Finally, Frank is given a phone and money and he zooms up. He doesn't really zoom. He drives pretty slowly. They're now out on the road and the lady is refusing to talk or even fasten her seatbelt. Now that's just irresponsible. Elsewhere, Inspector Takomi is at Frank's house trying to figure out what happened to him, and Mr. Minister's in his office trying to get himself out of the mess he's in. Elsewhere, two guys in a Mercedes clap a truck driver and take something from the car he was transporting. Back to Frank, we see that the lady is still proving difficult. Woman moment. She reminds him to make a call, and when he does, the person gives him a code, and he finds out that they're supposed to head to Budapest. What's in Budapest, he asks. Goulash, beer, she replies, and Frank stops the car immediately. He asks for proper introductions. He introduces himself as Frank Martin, but the woman refuses to give her own name. He doesn't manage to convince her to cooperate and he zooms off. But while he's driving, she has a change of heart and tells him her name is Valentina. Then they do the weirdest handshake you have ever seen. Now we see the inspector trying to figure out why the truck driver was clapped. He's watching footage of the shooting and trying to figure out what the gunman carted away with. Anyway, as it turns out, Mr. Minister caves and goes back to working with the guys from EcoCorp. Can you blame him though? They have his daughter. Now they're asking for him to sign off for 8 ships to be cleared, from 1 ship to 8. They want him to sign immediately, but he manages to convince them to wait 24 hours. He'll sign in Odessa, he says. Next, we see him on a call with 2 gunmen in the Mercedes. He tells them he's bought them 24 more hours and they say it's more than enough time. They don't just have a lead, they have a location, Budapest. They're probably coming for Frank and Valentina, but they're in the car having a cute moment about food. Just like me, food makes Valentina happy, and I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've seen her smile. As they talk, Frank moves away from the designated direction, and the boss is alerted ASAP. He orders Frank to be brought back to the right path, or he'll be killed. Frank is trying to get the metal bracelets off the wrists, and that's why he's here with his old friend. While they're trying to figure it out, a battalion of men show up trying to get Frank back on course. When he refuses to get back in the car, they get in formation. And what do you think happens next? He whooped all their butts yet again. Not quite as easy as the last time though. He had to loosen his tie and take off his shirt for this one. When the leader of the pack notices that Frank is winning this fight easily, he goes and gets the big guy. And frankly, this was Frank's first difficult fight. Frank is tossed around and given quite the beating, but he manages to outsmart the big guy and beats him up. Manlets win again. He goes back out, gets clothes from his car, and dresses up again. Valentina is now looking at him with desire in her eyes. She comes out of the car and tells him, "You fight good, but you tie bad," in a sussy manner, and walks back to the car to take a nap. Okay, the tension keeps intensifying between these two. Can't wait to see more. Frank is back driving and he calls the boss and asks for a face-to-face meeting. The boss calls on a payphone, and over the phone he tells Frank that he's fired. Before he even drops the phone, another man has made his way into the Audi and is now driving it away. Frank is running through the market to get the car back. It's not that he loves the car that much, you know. He's just trying to stay close so he doesn't blow up. Now he's on a bicycle chasing the car. He's literally riding through buildings to stay close, and he eventually kicks the guy out of the car, gets in, and resumes driving like nothing happened. Very based. He gets to a payphone and calls the inspector, who tells him some guys in Mercedes might be in Budapest looking for his head. Of course, you know the guy he's referring to. In return, Frank tells the inspector about Valentina and that he doesn't know what she has to do with anything except that she tells him he's going to die. He now calls the boss and tries to make a trade. He delivers the packages for the boss and he gets rid of the bracelet in return. But really, that call was to help the inspector track the location of the boss. Back in the car, Frank calls Valentina Russian, but she takes offense and says she's Ukrainian and that they're much different, up here, pointing at her head, and down here, pointing at her heart. What about down there? Also, recent events have really exemplified this, haven't they? Actually, perhaps Valentina single-handedly caused that whole issue. You know, like a butterfly effect. She then brings out 2 pills from her bag that, according to her, are from Ibiza. Oh, now it's a party. She puts one in her mouth, and when she's about to throw the second one in, Frank stops her. She's struggling with him, and that nearly causes an accident. They get through that and stop by a gas station. While Frank is refilling the tank, Valentina pops out into the store. From the way she's dancing and doing silly things at the store, you can tell what she took is hitting different. She takes a leak right there in the store because the toilet is too far out, and while she's coming back out, Frank notices a black Mercedes that passes him and parks in front. They don't even notice him at first. Awkward. A man comes out to pee and goes back in the car, but one of the guys notices Valentina being sussy through his side mirror, and boom, they're on Frank's tail. Another car chase. It's Audi versus Mercedes. Who are you guys betting on? Frank thinks the guys were sent by the boss, so he calls and asks, but the boss says he has nothing to do with it, but he'll try and get to the bottom of it. In the meantime, he tells Frank to drive faster, and Frank took that one personally and came up with a trick straight out of a comic book. He's driving on 2 wheels. I personally think it would have been much more believable if he made the car fly, but that's just me. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, his trick proves to be nothing but showboating because the Mercedes is still hot on his tail while they're driving through the woods. They're shooting at him now, and remember, it's all because a lady decided to get adventurous. And that goes for a lot of things in life. He managed to lead them into a valley where they crash into, and they all get fried. For the first time, he's taking a rest. Then Valentina starts giving him a massage and pays respect to the back of his bald head. He asks what she's doing. You can probably guess her response, but he says he's got no time for that. This is a focused, based, alpha man. She tries to argue with him, but he's not in the mood, so he gets out of the car. She takes the key from the ignition and also gets out of the car, still trying to get her way. She won't return the keys unless he does what she commands. Whoa. Anyway, the boss apparently can't track them where they are, but he has figured out that the men in the black Mercedes were sent by the minister, so he calls him and warns him that if he does something like that again, he would never see his daughter again. Mr. Minister, however, wants to hear from his daughter before he signs anything, and he appears to have also done his homework as he calls the boss by his name, Mr. Johnson, and that shocks him. Mr. Johnson is calling Frank, but he's preoccupied. We cut to Valentina narrating the story of how she and Malcolm ended up at Frank's house that day, from partying in Ibiza to getting transported in Malcolm's car and then getting chased by gunmen in France. As she keeps talking, she reveals she has feelings for him now. It's not even been a full day. Hopefully one day, I'll be able to relate. I need to start going outside. They finally get back on the road and Johnson gives them a new location to be at. Next, Mr. Minister arrives at a place where he meets the inspector, who tries to have a word with him about his daughter. He's helping the minister trace Johnson's call, after which he calls Frank and gives him an update. During that call, we find out that Valentina is the minister's daughter. That is the package Frank is supposed to deliver, but now he has gone and gotten himself attached. Johnson is now directing him to where the delivery is to be made, and apparently it's a bridge. He's trapped on both sides and gets a call from Johnson asking him to send Valentina out. They all come out of their Range Rovers, and Frank promises Valentina he won't die, and then tells her to go meet the men. But before she steps out, she asks for a kiss, and of course, he obliges. She walks to Johnson, who unshackles the metal bracelet. Her thank you to him was a spit in the face. I wouldn't mind, honestly. He wipes off his face, punches her in the stomach, leads her to the car, and instructs his men to finish Frank off. Immediately, they start shooting at him, and he just drives off the bridge straight into the water. They don't stop shooting, even while he's underwater. While he's there, he calls the inspector and tells him where he is. In the meantime, he finds a genius way to stay breathing underwater, and then floats to the top. I would have never thought of that. Johnson and his men take the lady to the train station, and they all board. Meanwhile, Frank is already out of the water by the time the police get there. Finally, the minister gets to talk to his daughter over the phone, and the only thing she says to him is don't sign. Johnson takes the phone from her and tells him he has just 15 minutes and hangs up. Over at the riverbank with Frank and the inspector, we find out that all this commotion has been happening because of garbage. Guess you could say this has all been a huge waste of time. Anyway, the inspector has managed to track the location of Johnson and his men, so Frank goes after them. It's a few minutes to 9, and the minister is going through the papers he's supposed to sign, trying to stall for a bit. Basically, his salvation has to come in the next few minutes. If not, he's doomed. Anyway, Frank has finally found the train, and he times his flight to perfection so that he lines the car on top of the train and then breaks into the train. There's now a gunfight, and Frank claps all of them. Of course, except Johnson. He comes so close to whipping Johnson, but he has to turn around and run back because he has gotten too far away from the car and his bracelet has started beeping. But he has a plan. He always does. He climbs back up to the top of the train and back into the car. He drives it straight into the compartment where Johnson is, and now he can fight him. Of course, it's not an easy fight, but of course, you know who wins. The interesting thing now, though, is how Frank manages to get the metal bracelet off his own wrist and onto Johnson's, and it was that bracelet that blows up and kills him. At the office, the minister signs the document, but as soon as he gets the call that his doctor is safe, he tears it up and goes straight for his conference. We end pretty poetically. Frank and the inspector are back fishing and sharing stories just like in the beginning, only that this time, Valentina is a part of the fishing party. Moral of the story? Jason Statham. Subscribe, I guess.